Welcome to the Gruber Morning Show. This is our weekly EV podcast. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good morning and welcome, everybody.
So glad you join us every week. We do this for you guys. And one of the things I wanted to lead with today was we got our Toyota video out there, and we're getting some interesting responses to that. We put together a video that fundamentally describes Toyota's reluctance to get into electric vehicles, and they're adamantly clinging to hydrogen as a path for non-renewable energy or for renewable. And we found that people are very much in agreement that this is a fatalistic move. This is an existential threat to even a large company like Toyota. And what the video points out, size does not necessarily protect a company from a demise. And we listed a bunch of them: Kodak, Blockbuster, Nokia. I left out a company I worked for 10 years. Digital Equipment Corporation, at one point in the 60s and 70s, was the number 2 global computer manufacturer, right behind IBM.
Well, and when you think about it, even IBM, they bought into the PC craze a little bit, but they kind of got arrogant and they put together a lower power PC for a higher price. And then companies like Compaq and Dell came in and took the marketplace. You don't see IBM PCs nowadays.
Yeah. And even if they survive, they're oftentimes just a shell of what they previously were. So there's a great degree of risk in not being willing to adapt.
Yes.
And I think it's more willingness. I don't think that there are really ignorant people in these companies. I think it's just an arrogance. It prevents them from moving with the times.
You know, it seems like there are too many people in this world who believe that success is a given or that success is guaranteed. And it's the fact that you never have more than a chance for success. And it's what you do to take advantage of that chance and increase it that makes you successful or not.
Mm-hmm. So for those of you interested, on our YouTube channel, Gruber Motors, which, by the way, is over 1 million subscribers now. We were pretty proud of that a couple of weeks ago when we crossed over that threshold. We were hoping it was during the middle of the day so that we could commemorate that momentous occasion with our audience, but it happened in the middle of the night, and I got up one morning at 4 o'clock, and we were right on the cusp. Got a screenshot of it.
Yeah.
And by the time I was done with my shower, we had already crossed over 1 million, and now I think we've got 30,000 more on top of 1 million. So, but anyways, we really appreciate our audience for joining us. It was you really that made that kind of number possible, and we'll continue to provide good content for the other people that join us every week.
By all means. By the way, our background picture, those are not mountains of snow in the background.
What is that, Mark? Describe that for the audience.
That is lithium salt on some sort of a salt flat. I don't know exactly where that's at, though.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll be getting into that shortly. The finding of another massive lithium holding, and we've talked a little bit about it. But the U.S. is becoming one of the hot spots of the world for lithium.
Social media guys, if we have people chiming in, the screen back there is on the screensaver currently. So if you're interested in commenting on anything that we're talking about, collaborating with us, disputing anything that we're saying, this is part of the process here. We find this to be an interactive session. One of the other things I wanted to point out was this social media post that keeps popping up, at least on my streams, is that Elon is buying Ford Motor Company. And there's a picture of him and Jim Farley shaking hands, sealing the deal. Well, it appears to be fake news, but it's really propagating a lot. What did you say, Aaron? You saw it on one of the sites that you frequent?
Yeah, so I'm actively on the 6.7 and 6.0 forums in Facebook, and they were posting that throughout the last week, saying that Elon is buying Ford. What are we all going to do? And then people just laugh at them.
Okay. So until it becomes official, we're going to call it fake news at this point in time and just be entertained by it.
And it really is making its way around the news. I'm looking at recent articles. Teslarati has something about it. MySA, Supercar Blondie, Quartz News. And these are all articles that are posted within the last 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to tell what the news cycle is going to be like, and can be hard to tell what's fake news and what's real with AI nowadays.
Or the source could be the Russians.
It could be.
So what is, however, happening is Tesla stock is surging, and it follows after developments like the new full self-driving update, expansion in China. Remember, they build plants lickety-split. They don't waste any time.
Yeah.
They are not necessarily regulation-free. They seem to have a more balanced view on what regulations, how important they are to the course of, changing the planet toward renewable energy. So it's interesting that this is happening when simultaneously traditional automakers like Volkswagen and Nissan are announcing layoffs and production cuts, and they're struggling to adapt to the rapidly evolving market dynamics, which are dominating the electric and autonomous vehicle technology. So it looks like we're at a pivotal moment in the automotive history, caught between embracing innovation for survival and managing the financial repercussions for such a transition. You had mentioned that Europe is really suffering with the onslaught of Chinese product beginning to flood.
Oh, they really are. VW is closing plants in Germany. Mercedes-Benz is suffering. Even Audi, another German engineering firm, is having a precipitous drop in EV sales. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it's much more expensive to make electric vehicles in Germany than it is in China, and China doesn't have the barriers to trade in much of the European Union that they have here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. We've got some questions coming in and some comments. TikTok MP 202021 says, any updates on the salt batteries? Not in this podcast, the sodium batteries, but as we get information, we'll certainly report on it, but nothing new that we're aware of. If any of you have information, feel free to chime in.
The latest I had heard on any kind of salt battery was what we announced a couple weeks ago about CATL coming out with a hybrid battery of 250 miles of range, and that was a sodium ion battery. The term salt, though, is kind of misleading because it's lithium salt.
They're all salts, basically.
Yeah, they're all salts.
Yeah.
Whether it's lithium or sodium or potassium, they're all salts on the chemical table.
Mm-hmm. Who would have thought that salts can move electrons efficiently?
Yeah.
All right, and then we've got YouTube, Spoony 412. He says, what's low energy nuclear radiation at room temperature? Seems like an advantage. No, do you guys have any input on that?
I do not have myself on that particular one. That's when we'll have to get back to Spoony 412 on.
Yeah. YouTube, Marek Gill says, hi, is that salt translated from Polish? Oh, I can't read Polish. A lot of C's and Z's in that sentence there, including some umlauts and some apostrophes on top of the letters. So anyone that speaks that language, I'm impressed.
I'm not even going to try.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah.
So the low energy nuclear reactions at room temperature is often referred to as cold fusion.
Cold fusion. Okay, there we go. Nothing that we can report on, no news that we're aware of, but as always, we are very excited about the prospects of that type of technology because that will revolutionize energy creation and usage.
It really will.
All right, I've got a picture here I'm going to pop up for you. See here, get this over here on the monitor. And Hyundai, it looks like, has decided that they want to return to physical buttons as American buyers prefer them over touch screens. What do you guys think? Social media guys, do you like buttons or are
hate buttons?
Hate buttons, okay.
I like buttons.
All right. So you would have
course
been a
you do.
Nokia cell phone user.
Well, my first phone user was a Razor, so I'm like used to those ones. And then after I got a Razor, I had one of those flip ones where it flipped and it was the full keyboard,
Uh-huh.
flipped open, and so I had that. And then my first iPhone was when I was a freshman in high school. And even the iPhone had its like home button. I'm just used to the buttons.
Gotcha.
I hate buttons because one goes out and you have to replace a whole entire panel. So like on my Ford, if one little switch goes out, I got to replace the whole thing. And it's not like a switch where I can pop out for maybe 10, $15. I got to buy the whole panel for 120 or 150.
Right.
And it's ridiculous. Where if you have that touch screen, if one button per se goes out, that whole screen's going out, you have a bigger problem, and it's a little bit easier just to swap out that.
It's probably a generational thing too, because certain generations still prefer, I think, the rotary dial phone,
Oh, yes.
and then the push buttons came later, of course, and oftentimes the screens confuse people.
I know it ages me, but I can remember the beginning of that transition, and it was only the fancy people that had the push button phones.
Uh-huh.
All of us normal people had the rotary dials.
So there you have it. Hyundai is gambling, and we're definitely sensitive to any of these companies deviating or not properly adapting, because there's an existential threat that's currently underway in the automotive industry.
Yeah, we have two more comments in. Looks like Aaron's side is winning here. TikTok, Tom Smith says buttons.
Uh-huh.
On Instagram, the Martin Auto Museum, thanks for joining us today. They're here in Arizona.
Yes.
They also say buttons.
It was me. I was the button.
Oh, I'm sorry. Cass is the
button
button.
lady.
Very cool. All right. So there is an interesting article that cropped up regarding the differences between Tesla and Lucid. And why is one so wildly successful and the other one is struggling? And, one of the most common questions they say in this article is that the Model S was cheaper to produce than Lucid Air. Why? You want to reach into that?
I do want to reach into that. There's on the surface you see a lot of comparisons between the two because you say, well, they took the same route. Tesla went from a high-end sedan, or a sports, very high-end car, a sports car in this case, the Roadster, to a high-end sedan, to a mid-tier sedan, to something for the masses. And Lucid, they say they're doing the same thing. Rather than the sports car, they made their sedan the sports car with the Lucid, like the Lucid Sapphire, and now they're moving into the Gravity, and then eventually going to move into the midsize. But there are actually a lot of differences between Tesla and Lucid in the way that they started. For example, first, we saw the reports recently. This last week, earnings came out, and they say it costs $355,000 for Lucid to make a car. No, it doesn't. All that somebody is doing is taking the math. They said they spent X number of dollars and they produced Y number of cars, divide them out, and that's what their cost is. Well, you've got all those fixed costs and stuff that are in there that are going to be fixed no matter how many cars they make.
Mm-hmm.
But the total number you get was terribly influenced, or wonderfully influenced in Tesla's matter. Lucid had to build their own plant. They stocked it with modern equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla bought a defunct factory for $42 million from General Motors in Fremont, California.
In Fremont, California, folks, acres and acres of land in a commercial setting, which today, is exponentially more costly.
Oh yes, they bought the whole thing for $42 million, and there were probably just the stamping and the paint shop and the plastics plant. Those three things probably would have been worth somewhere around $650 million.
Amazing. And by the way, they were building at the time the Geo Prism and the Vibe. This was GM.
Yes.
When they were still running the NUMMI plant.
So as a result of inheriting all this equipment that GM just didn't have use for, Tesla didn't have to outsource their stamped parts or their plastics. Lucid does.
They already had the tooling in the plant.
Exactly. So Tesla used a lot more off-the-shelf parts from than Lucid has been from other OEMs as well.
Which is a smart move because, you know, if you need a windshield wiper motor for your car that you're producing or you're manufacturing, it's infinitely more costly to put your engineering team on developing a motor for that windshield wiper and then having small quantity runs versus finding a product that's being used by a number of OEMs out there, VW, BMW, Ford, whoever, right? And now you've got a mass-produced product that cumulatively now in that car reduces the cost of the vehicle substantially.
Right. Just the simple fact that you're going to go and buy 2,000 trunk latches from the Ford manufacturer of trunk latches is going to put you into master distributor territory for pricing.
Sure. In fact, they list some of these things that Tesla used that were already being made for other OEMs. The steering wheel came from a Mercury, for example. Switching parts and harnesses, shifters, and wiper stalks, again, Mercury. Steering column, seat controls, blower motor came from the Kia Optima. The accelerator pedal from Ford Fusion, windshield wiper motor, Kenworth T800 truck, and many, many more.
Yeah, there were many more. Lest anyone forget, and it seems like people do forget as it fades further into history, what Tesla was doing, no one had ever done. No one had ever put together a viable electric vehicle, well, unless you go back to the early 1900s, but that's kind of a different story. And there was the open question of whether it even could be done. So it made no sense for Tesla to go out and try to engineer their own things. No one had ever done it. They didn't have the money to do it themselves.
Right.
Lucid, on the other hand, does have the money, and Tesla paved the road for them.
And they chose a different route. They didn't want to build, according to this article, a state-of-the-art car in an old factory with tooling meant for not-so-state-of-the-art cars. They built their own factory for nearly $1 billion and then outsourced all the stamping and plastic parts, thus making those parts a lot more expensive.
Yes, and yet Lucid is extremely fastidious about having control over all of the engineering, design, and quality of their own parts. They've become well known in the electric vehicle industry for having probably the highest quality of parts for any electric vehicles.
And the common denominator is more expensive.
It's more expensive, though. Now, lest anyone forget, at the time that Tesla was coming out with the Model S and the Model 3 and the Model Y, interest rates were sitting between 0 and 0.25% at the Federal Reserve level. Right now, they're somewhere 40 to 50 times higher than that, running anywhere from the 4.5 to 5.5% rate. I mean, even with the recent drop, the interest rates are still probably 35 times higher for Lucid to have to deal with than they were for Tesla to have to deal with.
And with Tesla being the first one in the space with a luxury EV vehicle, the demand was higher as well. And now you have Lucid with lower volume sales than Tesla. And at this time, with a more expensive car, which creates even less demand.
And lest we forget, Lucid's had a lot longer leash than Tesla had. A lot of these choices I made a reference to just a minute ago, Tesla did because they had to do them this way. Lucid has had a very large institutional investor in the Saudi Arabian PIF fund for somewhere around $8 billion into their plant because they believe that they can be the company in the future that makes one of the best electric cars in the world. Tesla had to blaze the trail all by themselves. They were going to places like barbecue manufacturers to get their parts.
For the Roadster parts,
because no reputable vendor was willing to work with them, not even on small scale. They just weren't willing to work with them at all.
Well, for two reasons. One is they were an unheard of company, and the volume was extraordinarily low for the Tesla Roadster. I mean, 2,400 cars is a prototype run for most of the big auto manufacturers.
Yeah.
So you weren't going to be able to go to, the big companies that were making OEM parts for the auto business.
Yeah. So, but so there's definitely comparisons between the path that the two have taken, but there are definitely significant differences as well.
Yeah.
It's my hope that Lucid can become as successful as Tesla is someday. And I continue to really enjoy seeing what's happening with Tesla in the marketplace.
hmm And our investment support probably supports that notion as well, doesn't it?
I think it does, yes.
It looks like Niels has joined us from Denmark. He says, "Good evening. Do you know which volume must be reached for the air and gravity before they make money?"
We don't, because we don't have enough information yet. We don't know what those fixed costs are. If you did a little bit of math, though, you could say, okay, let's say that the gravity that's going to come out at $80,000. I'm not going to worry about the Grand Touring version at $95,000. Just take the one that's $80,000, the touring version. If you sold 100,000 of those, that's going to be somewhere around $800 million in revenue. They had a loss just this last quarter of about $910 million. Their losses are widening even though their volume is going up. What we don't know is how much of that $910 million loss was into the capital investments, because they've got significant building projects going on in Saudi Arabia for the AMP2 plant and the final build out on the AMP1 plant down in Casa Grande here in Arizona. Let's say maybe 2/3 of that. Let's, if the car gets the same kind of gross margin that a car typically gets, which is somewhere in the 20 to 30% range, that $800 million in revenue would equate to probably $200 million in gross margin. That to me is going to be pretty close to where they need to be. So it's somewhere up around that 100,000 cars a year, give or take. You look at Tesla back in 2020 when they had the Model 3 and the Model Y and they suddenly turned profitable. That's about where they were at, between 20,000 Model S's, 50,000 Model 3s, and about 20 to 30,000 Model Ys. That 100,000 cars per year rate was about the tipping point for Tesla.
Mm-hmm. All right, it looks like we've got another comment here from YouTube. Spoony412 says, Tesla got the ASS Tech wireless charge. We're talking about the inductive charging here, I believe.
Yes, I think that's the case. If you wanted to extrapolate further, we'd appreciate that.
So there you have it. That's why a comparison between Tesla and Lucid may not be fair in order to draw conclusions about why they are where they're at. There was a different start and much more advantageous for Tesla, and perhaps some cleverness in the process. Instead of going out and recreating, they ended up reusing some of the stamping equipment, the tooling equipment, the infrastructure in the NUMMI plant. So one has to ask, would it have been wiser for Lucid to have bought an existing defunct plant? And then you have to ask, well, where might that be? Which big auto manufacturer has emptied out a plant that they could have taken over?
Yeah, and that's a good open question too. I'm not sure that there is one.
Right.
I had a question earlier this week that came in from one of our good listeners about the Lucid stock.
Mm-hmm.
They saw that Lucid tanked. It hit all-time lows in the last week. They had their earnings call. One of the biggest questions about the earnings call was, come on, guys, when is our stock going to go up? And Peter Rawlinson had some pretty specific comments about that. What he told people was that first, investors, he said, think of this as a long-term play. We're still a startup company. We're getting closer, but this is not going to be something that you can invest in and then 3 months later pull out your profits. He said Lucid's working on several initiatives, both to drive growth and to improve financial performance. He did not go into details of either of those, but we've heard separately in the press. Not only do you have the Gravity that's coming out at the end of this year, that Lucid is still on track for. The Lucid Air, of course, and there's now been talk about maybe they call it the Lucid Earth. We're not sure yet. They've gotten the trademark for it, but they're talking about a mid-size crossover SUV style vehicle because that's the largest segment of the market. And there has been some chatter about that, both official in Lucid and unofficial in the press. Rollinson also pointed out that as a major shareholder, because he owns 18.5 million shares of Lucid, he said he's put much of his personal savings into the company when Lucid was getting started up. He has a personal vested interest in Lucid. And he said on the investor call, I have not sold a single share of Lucid stock except what was absolute necessary for tax purposes.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, I happen to think that Lucid and every EV automaker not named Tesla dropped in price as a result of the election. It had nothing to do with the EV industry at all. It had to do with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that people who hold EV stocks had when Trump got elected president or reelected. Overall, I happen to think that Lucid's balance sheet is pretty strong for a startup. The fundamentals of the balance sheet are pretty good. They're coming up on an entire year of being able to meet the milestones that they set. At the end of 2023, they had revised their guidance downward in the third quarter to the end of 2023, and they said in 2024 we're going to make about 9,000 cars. They have not had to update guidance since then. At the end of 2023, they said we're going to have the Gravity ready for pre-order sometime early in the fourth quarter, with first deliveries rolling off the line by the end of 2024. So far, they've met exactly what they've said.
Are we saying that they tend to keep their commitments?
For the last year, they have.
Okay.
Prior to that, they weren't quite as good at it. If they can continue to keep those commitments, though, I think the future still looks really bright for Lucid. There are some significant downside risks, though. While their balance sheet's strong, thank you PIF fund, Sugar Daddy, they've still got a lot of cash burn. They're with what they announced last Thursday, they're burning cash at a rate of $3.5 billion a year. That means that they're going to have to either get some sort of loan or, more likely, further dilute the stock with some sort of capital offering again.
Would you think, though, that their CapEx expenditures are going to begin to diminish or decrease as the infrastructure begins to get ready for this higher level production?
I do. I believe that the AMP1 facility in Casa Grande is nearing completion. Our understanding for almost 3 years now is that the AMP1 facility was going to be essentially done by early 2025, and I think they're still on track for that. The AMP2 facility, which they're still ramping up, means that they're going to continue to have CapEx expenditures over in Saudi Arabia, but they're not going to be trying to build 2 auto manufacturing plants at once anymore.
Right.
And they're going to be taking that money that they've been investing in Arizona for the last 3 years, and they're going to be turning that money into dollars, into revenue, into return on that investment. So if Lucid beats, especially if they significantly beat their production output in 2025 over 2024, that's going to do wonderful things for the stock. Once Lucid hits that gross profit number, we saw that in Rivian a while back. Rivian's announced, hey, we are now gross profitable, meaning that we're making more money on the cars we produce than we spent to produce them. That was a bump in Rivian stock for a while. That'll be a bump for Lucid. Because I do believe it'll be when Lucid eventually reaches that net profitability number, all bets are off as far as how high the stock can go.
Yeah, it'll no longer be a
None
penny
of
stock.
this is investment advice. Please take this all with a grain of salt.
Thank you, Jesse, because the fact is these are my opinions,
Mhm.
and I'm not an expert. I'm a Lucid shareholder. I have a right to be optimistic. I bought into it, but if you want to drink my Kool-Aid, that's fine, and if you don't want to, that's fine too.
So YouTube, Spoony 412, he recommends the social media. Ask Grok. That's true. And Niels is chiming in saying, maybe a good time to get out of Tesla, question mark. Why do you see more YouTube comments than I do? Well, the first part, getting out of Tesla stock, I've been in it so long. It's a standard feature in my investment portfolio. And um, the mistake that I made personally, now again, this is not investment advice. I fancied myself a day trader for a number of years, and I never really was very good at it. So anyway, that's a stock. It'll go up and down, but overall it ratchets up. Why do you see more, or why do we see more comments, Niels? It's because we're streaming on 7 platforms, and we'll get Twitter, we'll get Instagram, we'll get a number of different
Right.
platforms that are chiming in, and we do our best to read those so the entire audience can see what the inputs are. So one final thing here, we have an article from Sawyer Merritt. Actually, it was a repost by Sawyer Merritt. And he says Autoblog has released a list of legacy automakers or brands that it thinks may not survive the EV transition. And lo and behold, the one that we just reported on or did a video on, Toyota, was in the middle of that list. You have any additional inputs about the other ones on this list?
Oh, this is a great list. And I hope we can get into this more next week as well.
Sure. I'm going to pop it up here, by the way, so you guys can see.
Some of these items on the list, Ford, you'd say, wow, Ford, they already make EVs. So why would they be in danger?
Right.
Well, they still haven't gotten the formula quite right yet. You've got other ones like Lexus and Infiniti that don't have any EVs at all. And I read through the original EV Apocalypse article, and I found it to be just absolutely fascinating. It's from autoblog.com. Again, let's see if we can get into this more next week. I agree with their basic premise that if you, at this point in the game, do not have an EV at least in the works that you believe is going to be something that'll have mass appeal, you need to question whether or not you're going to be in business in the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have this looming mandate by most of the governments that by 2035, you'll no longer be able to manufacture ICE cars. Now, they may relax that. There may be adjustments to that, but still, that's definitely looming. And then, of course, you have the onslaught of inexpensive EVs that are flooding various parts of the world.
Yeah, the Chinese, even if here in the U.S. we have the tariffs that effectively ban Chinese cars from the market, that doesn't mean that this market's not heavily influenced by the Chinese.
Right. Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of our podcast here, and we will see you next week then, and we'll be able to talk about some more of these. We've got some overflow here that we can bring into the next podcast as well.
Absolutely.
We'll be back next week for another edition of the Gruber Morning Show. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Thanks for joining us.